I want to talk about prerequisites to astral projection because I think that when approaching astral projection, there is a lot of people who they feel as if it is sort of a thing of entertainment. Whereas from my perspective, you sort of have to go in with the understanding first that you're engaging with reality as it is. And for most people who sort of accept what's placed in front of them and what they're told, etc., it can be very, very hard to conceptualize the fact that reality isn't just a bunch of math swirling around. That perhaps it's something more on the lines of a development of the soul wherein life and death are choices which can be made over a series of choices, not just a single choice, but a series of choices, wherein the universe and many universes and realms and things beyond your imagination exist, and wherein all those things are essentially at your fingertips. And most people reject that idea. And it's understandable that they reject it because they say, well, if that was true, wouldn't this be true, or wouldn't that be this way, and whatever and whatever. And they're extrapolating outward. They're projecting their own assumptions, their own limitations, their own priorities. And that sort of way of looking at it, I don't think is particularly healthy. Because you're assuming that you know, you're believing that you know, you're making assessments based on what you believe is concrete and absolute. It takes a sort of experience where you realize you know nothing in order to truly understand the enormity of life. And I don't think many people ever experience that in their lifetime. In fact, I'd go as far as to say I don't really think many people experience that in their death either, because if they are someone who is just floating with the current, then they will simply go along with whatever quote-unquote plan the beings on the other side have for them, meaning their autonomy, their personal autonomy, essentially doesn't exist. And it's understandable because it's very hard to have personal autonomy. And when it has to actually be developed to a point where they can handle the chaos of it all, the transformation of it all. So when someone looks into astral projection and they view it from the lens of a cool experience, but it's just an experience or it's all inside your head, they cheapen it. They make it worthless. They degrade it. And then they wonder why they don't have experiences. So as a prerequisite to astral projection and to getting out of body, and I think out of body is a much better explanation because the astral is almost always a reference to higher dimensions. Yet there are spiritual dimensions lower than us, and there are spiritual dimensions that overlap us. In fact, they all overlap us to some degree. And there are spiritual dimensions beyond what we know or what the universe is. And so to say astral projection is probably not completely accurate. I think probably altered states of consciousness is one way to talk about, but that generally refers to the mind. So I think shamanic journeying is maybe a better way to speak of it. out-of-body experience, perhaps a better way to speak of it, or the exploration of the soul and the universe is maybe another way to talk about it. So as a prerequisite to this type of practice, you must understand that right now your mind is in a known space. And if you have not had the experience, that means that your known space is limited. If your mind has not been completely blown into another dimension, that means that your known space, okay, the little fence you have around yourself, is pretty limited. And if you wish to go into this sort of a practice in order to blow your mind open and understand what it truly means to be a soul, then you must accept the fact that you're going to have to take down the walls that prevent you from going there and cross over to sort of to cross over the hedge to the other side. And that you have to be brave to do it, because there's one reality. And when I say there's one reality, what that means is, the implication is, that the physical world in which you exist is one with the spiritual worlds, and therefore they affect each other to some degree, in a sort of hierarchical fashion. Meaning that some of these places that you go have an outsized effect on the physical world, and some have an outside effect on the mental or spiritual world, and some have an outside effect on ideas and concepts and perception and experience and feelings. And that it's a soup. It's a mess. It's not a thing which you can control, because it is irrational. And I know I've mentioned this before about it being irrational. And one of the barriers that's in your way, one of these walls, is ego and fear. And ego and fear are essentially binding materials that allow you to incarnate into the world. And I know I mentioned this earlier too. The fact is, in order to incarnate, you must lower part of yourself, or already have a lowered piece of yourself, that can interact directly, connect directly, and anchor itself to the physical world. And we call this ego, and we call this fear, and we call this lust, and we call this, there's a whole list of words to describe these binding materials that anchor your soul to the physical world so that you can share it with other people. And they have their purpose. It's not that they don't have a purpose. They definitely have a purpose. You wouldn't be here if they didn't have a purpose. But the trouble is that when a chicken is born, it is one with, when the egg is laid, it is one with the egg. The shell is itself. The material inside is itself. It is all one thing. But as it matures, it separates itself from the egg, and the shell is left, and it must break through the shell to get out. So, likewise, the ego is the shell, and these binding materials are the shell. And a person who never overcomes the ego or never puts it in its proper place is a chick that never broke free from the shell. That's what it is. So the practice of out-of-body experience is an attempt to break free from the shell. Now understand this. There is both good and bad experiences that you'll have to undergo, and that is just a fact of sharing reality. If you are in the physical world, you're sharing it with billions of other people, and your experience will sometimes be good and it will be sometimes be bad, but you will accept that because, well, of course it can be good and it can be bad. We don't always agree, so it will be bad. Or sometimes we do agree and it will be very good. Okay. And sometimes we compete and that will be good or bad. Whatever. But the same applies to the spiritual world because there is one reality. So if you're fearful of a bad spiritual experience, then I suspect you're fearful of a bad physical experience, and I suspect that you're the type of person who's not very good at facing your fears because you're incentivized by fear. So one has to make the choice that it's okay for life to be difficult. And that's a very hard choice to make because everybody wants an easy life. And there's some purpose to an easy life, so don't think that there isn't a purpose to an easy life. But if you wish to understand what it means to be a soul, you're going to have to go through a lot of difficulty just to understand that. So as a prerequisite, hopefully this is a prerequisite to astral projection, you must first understand what you're agreeing to. What you're agreeing to is to see reality for what it is as best you can. And if you are not agreeing to that, and you have experiences, become very suspicious that perhaps your experiences are not yours, that they are influenced in some way by something external. Because experiences that are not agreed to, meaning that you have not pursued yourself, are almost always external forces. And one example of that is psychedelics, in the sense that psychedelics is an external thing which you consume typically, and it produces an experience that's spiritual in nature. Not saying that's necessarily bad. It could be good. I don't know. I don't really use them. But what you have to understand is that in this process, you're trying to break free from a shell, and that it's scary, and that you'll have bad experiences, and that it'll transform your life, and sometimes towards the worst, towards the worst direction for a bit. Overall, it seems to always bring it back to a positive direction, but that doesn't mean that that's how it starts. And most people will just simply shy away from that because they already have enough problems in life. And that's one of the strategies that people in power employ, is to keep people busy and distracted so that they do not understand the wool that's being pulled over their eyes. Now, if you're someone who wants to pursue mysticism, you're going to have a little bit of bravery, and you're going to have to make a decision that you want to see reality for what it is, regardless of the consequences. And I really do mean regardless of the consequences. You can't sit there and say, oh, well, I'm okay with this, but not that. I'm okay with this, but not this. Because reality itself cannot be known unless it is complete, meaning it must have all inside of it, which means you must be unafraid of any consequences. Now, understand this. You ultimately decide through your choices how much power you have and how much knowledge you have. And you decide through your priorities what you value. And you show the world through action who you are. And you develop your soul based on your willingness to face fear, your willingness to take risks, your willingness to allow your mind to go to places that are sometimes considered frightening. And those are the people, the brave people, who develop spiritually and begin to understand the world for what it is. So it's one of those things where, how does someone who is crossed over to the other side many, many times communicate to someone who does not have a concept yet of what that is? And I think the true answer is, I can only point in a direction. The information lies on the other side. It does not lie on this side. Otherwise, they would be together already, and you would know already, and I would not have to say anything. Their separation is not fundamental, but it is a separation that is done by choice by people and what they are comfortable with and what society is comfortable with talking about. So there's actually nothing that I can communicate to you other than this is the direction you have to go and these are the things you have to accept. There's nothing I can tell you that's going to produce an experience, and I'm going to continue talking about this until I feel it's ready to actually talk about the experiences themselves. However, I feel as if sometimes it is a disservice to tell people about your experiences because then they believe that they have the knowledge of the other side when they do not. And so they are deceived by themselves and by their own ignorance. However, I've also come to the conclusion that that is their issue. That is their problem to figure out. That is not my problem. And if I feel as if I want to speak about something, then I will speak about it because that, it is not a negative thing. It is only negative if people make it into a negative thing. So I suppose maybe this is a good place to end, with the idea that I can only point you in one direction and tell you what you'll have to face. I cannot give you spiritual progress I cannot mature you as a soul through my knowledge. There is no easy route. There's no cheat code. If you're looking for that, you should probably look somewhere else.